You cannot get rid of them and leave nothing behind. You need to replace it. You can't leave this vacuous nothingness there. Like, I'm going to get closer to God, so I'm going to quit my job. You know, and he's like, unless you're ready to really move that center to be your real center, you're just going to have this nothingness there, and it's going to eventually suck you back out to the periphery. And so, really a big part of this journey of the soul is replacement therapy from one center to another. So Teresa gives the antidote. She says, what's the antidote? Prayer and contemplation. Not surprising. I mean, nothing, but that's what makes this great. It's not a magic circle on the floor. You know, it's not some ancient Hebrew. It's not some weird runic sigils. It's not, you know, knowing some language. It's prayer and contemplation. It's plain and simple. You want to get to the goal, it's prayer and contemplation. She uses the parable of the wedding banquet, where it's the parable where Jesus says, you know, there was a king and he was having a wedding banquet. He tells his servants, go out and invite all these people, and some people came and some people didn't. But what Teresa says is, she says that prayer begins with God. Okay? Prayer doesn't begin with us. It doesn't start when we give the sign of the cross and we say our Hail Mary and our Father and whatever else. Prayer begins with God, and it has been happening since the beginning of time. And she says prayer is more about listening than speaking, which is something we state a lot, but she gets a little more specific about it. It's not just listening for God or listening for anything in general. She says prayer is specifically listening for the invitation from the King. So she says that invitation is constantly ringing throughout the world. And prayer begins when you hear the invitation from the King at the center saying, come feast with me. And so that's where she kind of starts. And she says that these periphery centers, part of their self-appointed jobs is to create a lot of noise so you can't hear that invitation anymore. You know, and you know, because once you start answering that invitation, those periphery centers start losing their own validation. So the goal is the unification of wills. This is very important. There's lots of unifications. There's unification of prayer, unification of spirit, different things. But it's a unification of wills. When your will and God's will become one and the same, that's the ultimate goal. And what the interior castle does is it gives you a roadmap from the periphery to the center. So we at least know now where we're going. We're going to drive here in a second. And she states, though, that you don't abandon the periphery. You don't end up in some samadhi state of trance. You know, you actually, the point of it is to return back to the periphery as something different and something new. And we'll talk about how Teresa was. It's actually quite interesting when she gets to her end, what it looks like, because you're like, oh, okay. So, the first room in her structure is seen as an outside courtyard, much like our outside courtyard. You know? So, the beautiful flowers and birds and all that good stuff. But she also says it's filled with all these bugs and reptiles that torment the soul. And for those who, at this point, are thinking that the journey of the interior castle is one of these deep meditation techniques or anything, I'm here to tell you that it's not. So some of you can take a breath, and some of you can be like, well, what's the point? But because Teresa says it, to get to the first room, it's for people who pray a few times a month. That's it. You know, it's people who, like, you know, drive by a Virgin Mary statue and they're like, oh, I remember when that was a thing when I was a kid. Okay, you know. It's not difficult. We've already went through that. I'm hoping that those of us in this room have already gone through that part, you know. She says it's not a judgment. Teresa says it's not a judgment. She says it takes tremendous faith and tremendous courage to be able to, after all your faculties tell you that this is not important, this is not real, this is not this, this is not that. She said it takes incredible courage to see through all of that, even just for a moment, and say, there's something divine and sublime in the world. And recognizing that. So she gives it its place. And unfortunately, it's not a participatory award. Like, oh, thanks for participating. You didn't win anything, but here's your ribbon. So it's not necessarily that. But she emphasizes the fact that at this level, the imagery of God in humanity is faint. It's there, but it's just faint. Because it's got all these sheaths it has to come through, all these filters it has to get to. So that's the outer courtyard. The second room, she says, one begins to feel a personal relationship with the divine. This is not just like a rote kind of thing. It's not your mother telling you to pray your rosary or do your bedtime prayers. This is something you're genuinely doing. Because you feel something, and you're recognizing something. We hear God in normal ways, she says this time, because she's emphasizing that, like, you can go deep into this without having visions. You know what I mean? Like, so you don't have to be a visionary like me. God in normal ways. Books, friends, sermons, those kind of things. She says that prayer becomes a conversation amongst friends. You should drop your prayer books at this point and start talking to Jesus for real, And I don't think this is in a hokey kind of way. I don't think this is like, it's not that guy in the corner right there, It's not Scandinavian Jesus with the lamb, and he's my best friend, So it's not like that at all. But it's about being intimate. It's about, because the whole process you start to see that this is a courting ritual between a young girl and the man she loves. And so you're going to, you don't actually have things like, you don't get a pamphlet when you get married that says, well, when your husband says this, you should say this. Yeah, I mean, like, that doesn't happen. It actually happens from real interaction and knowing somebody. And so that's Teresa's point. You should be friends with divinity at this point. You should know them.
There's for all the talk sometimes that we get into about the impersonal nature, when you look at gnosis from a classical standpoint, which deals with certain information that allows you to achieve certain things, there's also another facet to gnosis or direct knowledge that has always been translated as acquaintanceship.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that it's a process of acquaintanceship, and in that, we might, I wouldn't want to necessarily veer into the evangelical person of Jesus, right? But there is that give and take, that process of knowing acquaintanceship. It has been a legitimate interpretation of the direct knowledge process.
And I have some people, that I try to steer away from the person of Jesus too, but at the same time I was like, I'm not one person all the time. I do things with you that I don't do with you. And I do things with them that I don't do with you, And that's just sometimes how things are. And sometimes Jesus does things with you, and sometimes Jesus does things with me. And that's just how that is. And it's not a personal Jesus thing. I feel that if it's done in the right amount of discernment, and if it's real. If it's a real interaction, then... but then we start getting into that antinomianism.
Yeah.
Aspect of like, well, I don't have to listen to these rules because I know better, and so there's a fine line. I think it's definitely abusive or abusable and manipulatable. Me and Jesus are just gonna get drunk and drive around town.
Is personal Jesus too personal? He's got his feet on my couch.
Yeah.
He's picking through my fridge.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I always kind of think of it like, Jesus is always the king. Regardless if he shows up in your living room or not, he's still the king. And if the king decides to visit you in your living room, well, then that's a gracious honor. You know what I mean? So I'm not just going to break out the Cheetos, and just be like, let's watch TV, So it's not that lax, but it is a matter of like, you still care about me even as the king enough to come into my living room. And that means that we're friends regardless of our divine status, And I think that's what Teresa's trying to say here too, So she said, you're still the king, but I'd like to be your friend. I'd like to get to know you more, You know, this is nice. I'd like to get to know you more. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing. So the second room is like, you know, the first room is just kind of like, I see Jesus across the room and he's fine, but I don't want to talk to him just yet. You know, and the second room is a little bit like, hi, my name's Teresa. What's yours? You know. So, and even a little bit of the woman at the well kind of feeling when Jesus is like, so, can you give me some water, and are you married? You know, and same kind of feel, I think, at that point. Teresa says that this room is one of the hardest rooms because she says that hearing God's call to the center is sometimes harder than not hearing it. And on a Jungian kind of level, I would say that this is where one starts to really start talking to their shadow self. This is one where they say, okay, I'm in the house. I'm actually through the door. I'm in the house. Am I really worthy to be like, you know, can I really just get in your fridge and get my own drink? Like, you know, you start to question your worth in this house.
You know what you're missing.
Yeah, exactly. But you're also right by the door, and your purse is still on your arm, and you're just kind of like, you know, if we leave now, nobody will know we were ever here. You know, so, and so that, for Teresa, that's what she's saying about this room, is that, like, people get in there, and then they realize when in the presence of the king, how unworthy they are. And sometimes, at this point, they just turn around and go back. Okay? Yeah.
It's a vulnerability and admitting to it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Yeah, and that's what it, and I think it's also one of the more common forms of gnosis that we experience is when we actually look at ourselves in a clean mirror. You know, and that's what happens. You know, it's not smogged up with our own perceptions or the perceptions of other people, but this is who I am, for good or ill. You know, ugly or pretty. Yeah, this is who I am.
There's a certain thing that goes. The unawareness that comes with awareness, you know, like Uspensky in Psychology of Man's Possible Evolution, you know, makes reference to the first thing you realize when you wake up is that you were previously asleep. And sometimes that realization can be pretty jarring.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes the greatest thing that you can know is knowing what you don't know. And in many ways, I think this is a realization for Teresa of like, oh, these are the things I've ignored. You know, and probably at this point when she got to the second castle, this is probably the point where she started going, I was such a stupid girl. Like, I was just so vain, and I just cared about all this dumb stuff, and now I'm laying here catatonic with malaria, you know, can't move my legs, can't really do anything, and I can't believe I thought that these things were important at the time. You know, so, you know, when she's experiencing the second room, that's where she is physically, alone in a bed. You know, a 20-some-year-old girl, I don't want to say girl, but, you know, in a sense, yes. I mean, she was very sheltered from a lot of life. And now all of a sudden she's just got malaria, you know, and so she starts looking at the vanity of her, you know, trivialness as growing up as a child and stuff. And we've all done that. It's called self-reflection, you know, it's called growing up, you know, so it's not a judgment on her. It really is. It's her growing pains. And a lot of this travel is a very natural progression through life. The third room, she states, is that, you know, obviously spiritual and disciplined persons, okay? People with good spiritual reputation. Now, you can get a good spiritual reputation a lot of ways. I think you can get one on the internet nowadays. But, you know, so, but I don't think she's just talking about like, oh, well, you must be a good guy because you're a priest.
You'll keep it easier without the internet.
Yeah, so, exactly. I think she's actually talking about like somebody who's like, oh, you know, Rebecca's a very charitable person. She's not wearing a collar, she doesn't run a parish or whatever, you know, but, you know, she's a very charitable person, and she, you know, she prays, and I see her go to church, and
she gave me Vegemite.
Yeah, well, there you go. Is that the 9th sacrament now? So, or is that the 8th sacrament for down under? Okay, so. You know, people with regular prayer lives, pious and charitable. Okay, real simple. And I would think many of us here are even there. I mean, if we're not here, we're in 2. Okay, so we're vacillating a little back and forth. The fourth room is kind of it's like I always consider it to be like the hallway between the outside rooms and the inside room. Okay, it's the in-between point. And really, because when you look at the different rooms, this is the room where you start to relinquish your ego control. The first 3 rooms were dependent on you. If you decided to pray a couple times a month, that's on you. If you decided to boost your church life up a little bit, that's on you. If you decide to live a very practiced and disciplined life and raise a good Christian family and this, that's on you. And at this point, Teresa says, if you want to get further in your spirituality, you have to accept that it's not on you. And you need to start letting things go and start surrendering. And she used this analogy of these 2 fountains in this room, and she said the first 3 rooms are watered by a fountain where they take the water from the source and they put it in this aqueduct system, and it goes through this pipe, and then it comes over here, and then it fills this fountain over here. And the second fountain, which represents the next few rooms, they just lifted the fountain and put it on top of the water source. And so it fills up from within. And so instead of having all these external ways to support your spirituality, she says this is the choice between moving from more of an exoteric practice to a more esoteric internal contemplative practice. And she says at this point, the spiritual graces experienced are less formulaic and much more organic. So instead of every time I pray my rosary, I just feel so good after it. That's kind of those first 3 rooms. It's much more formulaic. You get into a habit of practice that makes you feel comforting. She says the spiritual graces now received just kind of happen. Like, I feel good for no reason. You know, or this kind of sign just came to me, or this right person, and it wasn't like I searched for it, like things just kind of started connecting for her. Synchronicities, yes, you know. But I think there was a much more like intuitive spiritual relationship, though. It was just more like, I don't need to pray this particular prayer to feel this particular feeling. You know, I can just kind of send it out there, like, I'm really sorry that I did that. You know, and send that energy there and it would come back. I don't need to actually say the act of contrition to get there, you know, kind of thing. So she's starting to, like, you know, kind of pull away. And I think that she's seeing a little bit this, too, whenever she's confessing to all these people who are like, well, that doesn't seem right, because if you did this, 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 and this, then this should have happened. And so this must be Satan. You know, like, so, and so she's starting to, I think at this point in her life, starting to have a little bit of disenchantment with the authority around her. The 5th room, this is where it get a little hazy and fuzzy, and that's just kind of how things are whenever you go through these ethereal realms of consciousness. If you haven't been there, then you'll never know, and we don't have the words to describe them. But the 5th room is called the Prayer of Union, which is completely misleading because it's not the goal. And but it's called the Prayer of Union because it's more of a union of perception. It's more of like, I can see the world the way God sees the world. I may want it to be different, but I can see it the way He sees it.
We're now dating.
Yeah, we're dating. I understand his point of view. He'd like to get a job in the city. I might want to live in the country, but, you know, I understand where he's coming from. Okay? And then she also states that, like, this is where the visions and the gnosis really kind of, she didn't say gnosis, but this is where the visions really start happening for her, is in this 5th room. And if you think about a union of perception and sharing God's vision, I often wonder if did she actually have a vision of an event that happened to her, or did she actually just see beyond the veil of something that was happening already? And so I question some of the visions that she has, if they were directed really for her, or if she was just in a state of consciousness where she just kind of saw divine interaction in the world around her. The 6th room is called the Prayer of Betrothal. I mean, we're really, these last few rooms, we're really getting into the marriage symbolism. You know, she's like, all right, I'm in wedding planning mode. Okay, so the Prayer of Betrothal, and she can kind of say, I personally say, it is much more like 2 candles at a wedding ceremony used to light that single one. And, sorry. That'll work. So, where it's one flame, but you still can envision those 2 candles being separated in that way. It's kind of a vague room for her. And for some reason, this is where Teresa does all of her, oh my God, this is my horrible life vomit dump. You know, she starts saying, I was so sick, you didn't even know. Okay, I had to deal with all these aristocrats, you don't even know. Church officials, she just starts like letting it out. You don't even know what it took to get here. For some reason, I guess maybe towards the end of the book, she was just like, I'm tired of writing this book, I'm tired of defending myself, I'm tired of writing all these protections into this book. I've had enough. I'm sick of all these things. So
it's if you're going with the wedding theme, it's the oh my God, we're 2 months away from the wedding. I'm tired of talking to caterers. I'm tired of looking at venues.
Exactly. And she talks about here how she also talks about how most of her life she struggled with being married to the church but in love with God. And that's how that was worded. She struggled, you know, she's basically, and she doesn't outright say this because I think they would have used it against her, but I think she might have wanted to say that at times I think she felt like she was cheating on her man with the church. And so she kind of puts that through. She says she has her doubts. She said for a long period she thought she just made it all up. You know, she had her doubts as to whether it was real or not. And she said that the only way she could get through that was just through acts of charity. She said, when I doubted if God actually gave a crap about me, when I doubted that I actually received any of these visions, I could at least count on the fact that there were people that needed my help. And I continue to do that. And that really reminds me of another Teresa. Because after Mother Teresa died, she had that her autobiography came out and she had her doubts all the way up to her death. But at the same time, she was known to be a model of charity and social activism. And so those 2 Teresas just really connected with me in that moment. You know, that St. Teresa also had her really big doubts and she saw through it, or at least said the most important thing I can do at this time is to take care of my fellow brothers and sisters. And she also said in this room she just wanted to die. She was done. She was tired, you know, and again, tired of talking to caterers and dealing with this and that. She wanted to die. She's like, I just want to be with him. And if that means dying, then so be it. Like, she was just tired of the whole journey. I bring that up because it's very significant, because she doesn't really feel that way in the next room. When she gets to the next room, first of all, she's no longer concerned with contemplation. She's done with it. I'm sick of it. Done with it. She just flat out says, in that room, I no longer need it. Her and God are one. The division has been healed. Therefore, the medicine is no longer needed. And that's kind of how she saw that whole contemplative journey, was that I had this division. There's a separation between me and my man. And now that we're together, I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to talk to caterers anymore. I don't need to plan this anymore. I got the ring. Okay, like, you know, so I don't need to do that anymore. And when she talks to this, she talks like an old married couple at this point. Like her and God are one. I don't need to talk to that old man anymore. I have gone through my whole life just trying to get him to marry me, and now I'm done. Okay? I got stuffs to do. And she literally says, I ain't got time to talk to God. I'm too busy building convents. I'm running a new order. You know, he's over there being grumpy, you know, and doing his thing on his rocking chair, and I'm an old lady and I got things to do. It's totally not an ecstatic experience. She says there's no longer any visions, no longer any trances. It is definitely 2 old people who have struggled their whole lives just being with each other, and now we're just tired. Okay, so it's a very domestic ending to a very deep journey for her. She says she lives in prayer. Her movements are now her prayer. She does not have time to sit in trance or to pray her rosary for hours. My work and God's work are the same. And that's why the end goal was unification of wills, and not a unification of perception, or not a unification of understanding, but a unification of wills. So now, when she makes a convent, God makes a convent. And when she gets sick, God gets sick. It's just kind of one of those relationships now. And she also says she's now a lot more relaxed in her physical principles. You'd think somebody who went through this great discipline, because we hear it all the time, the sadhus and the great meditators, and they get to this deep level. But you think that they kind of would rest there, or that would be the place, like let's meditate for hours and hours and hours, because that's not selfish. But but she says no. She's like, now I'm going to enjoy the world that God gave me, because she sees now that the world is her gift from Him. It's her wedding gift, and it may be a little tainted and tarnished, and she no longer wishes to die. She now wants to be a part in the world, and she wants to bring more of who she's with now into that world.
She needs to add new drapes to the castle.
Yeah. She's I'm First Lady now. And she returns to the world, with this new self-awareness. She can now approach the world not as Teresa, but as Teresa who went through this process and these levels. So, that's kind of it for the whole interior castle. I do have a couple more. I will tell you that Teresa did. She died at the age of 67, and she, even after her death, she was highly debated and went through. There were many people who had to defend her works and her writings. She did write another book called the Formations, and it was another book for spiritual sisters, but it had very, very little actual mystical or spiritual content. It was much more. And I don't think she just wanted to deal with it anymore. She needed to write a book, and she didn't want to deal with it, so she's just like, all right, on Tuesdays you wash the floors. And kind of those kind of things. And, but strangely enough, it was only 40 years after she died that she was declared a saint within the church. She finally was exonerated from all of her accusations, and in 1970, she was declared a doctor of the church, along with St. Catherine of Siena, the first two women in the Catholic Church to ever receive that title. And she's considered the doctor of prayer. And and a lot of things have spun, a lot of modern contemplative things have spun from Teresian prayer, like centering prayer has a lot of similarities and roots to the interior castle life. And while Lectio Divina, I think, is older, it's kind of along the same vein of what she does. And there's other things you can do with it, and I didn't want to express that necessarily here, so we might want to cut this out at some point. But but there are some things that I've researched, or I've talked to people, or different things that they've done with this other, they've compared the rooms to chakras, and how each room is experience a different chakra in that system, or and somebody actually assimilated them to the sacraments. And they were saying, the first room is like baptism, because when you see a little kid and they pray to Mary once or twice a month, it's so cute. Oh, look, he knows what Jesus is, some little rugrat. And that's okay. But when you have a 35-year-old who's like, I said my Hail Mary today, then that's a little different. So they represented this as baptism, and the second room, because you have to face yourself, that's confession. That's the next sacrament, at least in modern times, modern American sacramental Catholic Church. That's the next sacrament you get after baptism is confession. And so that's when you start receiving your, facing your shadow. Regular prayer life, going to church in regular life, that's communion, and then choosing between the external and the internal, that's your confirmation. That's your first real choice in deciding to move further. And then they continued on with, this is, prayer of union is actually marriage. And, the prayer of union is holy orders, then marriage. And they said the last one, the final union, was like the anointing or the death one, in the sense of like, we're here and we're together and it's the end.
I was going to say the sixth one would probably be holy orders, because I spend a lot of time bitching about people.
Yeah, I don't know, you could probably, my point is that you could probably rehash this process different ways to keep it fresh and interesting. Like, you can go through and be like, I prayed and meditated, and yeah, I met God, and so you can switch it up and change it.
Well, it may not even be a conscious switch up. It could be that you get to a certain point and you need to reevaluate, so you start from either right from the beginning or go a couple steps back. I need to relearn or refigure out or rediscern what am I doing.
Yeah. Well, and the thing I love about this too is that she's not on the list of saints in our communion simply because she had malaria-induced visions. Because that would really make me feel a certain way about how we pick our saints in this church. Okay, so she was, I find, in a much greater way, St. Teresa's on the list because she was smart, she was cunning, she was inceptive. She's like, I live in a crappy demiurgical system, and I'm going to find a way to inseminate that system with wisdom that's illegal, counterfeit, or whatever. You know what I mean? That kind of rebellious, Gnostic, heretic energy. And I mean, to the day that she, like I said, she would never claim to be a Gnostic. But I think that you can't have visions like you have without knowing something more than the people around you. And that was what made me question why she wrote that line about the Lutherans. She didn't make a big deal about it. It's just one little line. Oh, don't forget, pray for the Lutherans because they're bad. The church says they're bad. I don't think she actually felt that way. I mean, when you have a seraph stabbing you in the stomach with a lance of fire, you know what I mean? Like, who's going to be like, down with the Lutherans? You know what I mean? Like, so, so a part of me instead is because I think she said that to throw off the authorities. Oh, by the way, men in collars, I'm not one of them Lutherans. I don't think she really thought about the salvation of the Lutherans in those sense. It wasn't a big part of her book, and she never really said anything else about it. I think it was just more her being that Valentinian Gnostic of like, I can live in this system and find my own meaning in it. And but I can't do that as publicly as maybe some people could because of the time I live in. So I'm just going to do it on my own, and I'll just say what I need to say to get by. So and I respect that. I really do. So I'm like, I don't have a problem calling on her at the altar, for that reason, because, it's much better reason than, oh, I had a vision because, they kept feeding me poison to try to cure my poison. So, yeah. Any questions? Good.
So, very good, thank you.
There's a couple of typos.
I know. Yeah.
So before you send it up.
I wasn't as good of a spell checker as St. Teresa was, so.